Hi, Brennan.
Hey, Steve, what's up?
How you doing?
I'm doing good, and you?
Good, good. Tell me about those shoes you're wearing. Those are...
Oh yeah, I just got them a while ago. Air Force Ones, they're nice.
Okay, basketball shoes?
More or less, yeah.
Yeah, cool, cool. Brennan, for those who don't know you, how old are you? What school do you go to? And tell me, how tall are you?
Okay, I'm 13, turning 14 in about a week. I go to St. Anne's, and I am about 6 feet tall, so.
And you're expected to grow taller, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, his dad's 6'6", so he may one day be looking down on his dad. So St. Anne's is a private denominational school. It's a Roman Catholic school, correct?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And Brennan, he was raised in the church. He's brought up here in St. Andrews, so you're a cradle Christian, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You were baptized, presumably, when you're younger. Your parents were raised in your church. Your grandparents were raised in the church, too?
I think so, yeah.
So generations, Christian for generations. And so surrounded by it at school, surrounded by it at your church. Of course, we live in what many call a sort of post-Christian nation or a secular nation. Maybe about 15%, 30% of people have a sort of active connection to any church. Lots of different values in our society and lots of different understandings of the world. I imagine sometimes it feels kind of weird, you know, negotiating a life where faith, a world where at school, you know, faith is taken for granted, or not taken for granted. Faith is a part of life, and then a world, the rest of the world, where, you know, faith doesn't really come up that often.
No, for sure, you're right, yeah.
Yeah. So, does that kind of raise any questions in your mind about faith or the Bible, like?
I mean, like anyone, of course, I have a bunch of questions, though. I'll ask you a couple today, hey?
Yeah. Actually, Brennan texted me 5, and I said that that was a lot. And he was kind of stumping me with some of them, so I asked if you would cherry pick a couple that we could share today. So tell me, what are a couple questions that you have about?
For sure, yeah. The first one I got, something I've been thinking about for a long time, and I'm sure a lot of people have thought kind of the same, but it's like, okay, so in the Bible, in like Genesis 1, it kind of talks about like Adam and Eve, and like it creates people and then animals. You know, God creates people and then animals. But you know, it doesn't really mention the stuff that came before that we've proven archaeologically, like dinosaurs and like evolution. Like the Bible doesn't really explain that. So I was wondering how you could maybe explain why that is.
Okay. And is that a problem for some people when they hear like evolution and then they try to compare it with the biblical accounts?
I mean, not really for me personally. One of the big questions of life, of course, is like the battle between like faith and religion to like facts and science. But
okay.
I mean, it's just something interesting I'd like to know.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, for sure. Okay. Yeah, so the Bible has a few creation stories. Actually, there's 4. There's one in Job, there's one in the Psalms, and there's 2 at the start of Genesis. And I think you were describing Genesis chapter 2, where it starts with the creation of man and woman, and it goes on to vegetation, which is kind of the reverse of like what we would be taught about evolution. I mean, life progresses from less complex forms to more complex forms, right? And so for some people, yeah, that creates a real, like, what is the Bible saying? Like, Bible science textbook, like, they're describing something completely different.
Yeah.
And so I guess my approach would be to say that the Bible isn't a science textbook. Like, we have to compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges. Like, the Bible's a creation story. It makes more sense to compare it, for example, to an Aboriginal creation story, a story of, you know, Turtle Island, for example, than sort of a scientific text. I mean, science is about explaining how. Most creation stories, they're about explaining why and who. So they're really addressing different sorts of questions. And so I guess in that way, I don't see them in conflict, I see them complementary, because science on one hand can tell us how, like over a series of a long period of time, these processes happen, incremental change, higher life forms. It's a theory, and it seems to have a lot of support, right? The Bible, though, it's a description of who and why. Like, why are we here? Well, who is the source of all things? I mean, even if you follow evolution, you're still left with that question. Like, why the Big Bang? Why something out of nothing? And I think biblical stories of creation, other creation stories try to answer that question. And ultimately, it tells us God. God started this all. God set it off. God is the one who's responsible for everything, for the sun in the sky, the moon, the plants, the animals, the walrus, the geese. God is the origin of this all, and the Bible tells us more about this God wanting to have a relationship with us. So I think, I don't see them as in opposition. I see them as kind of complementary.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, my second question too, it's kind of about, so say like there's some poor places in the world, obviously, and people might not get the opportunity to go to church and like learn about God. And some people might not even know about Jesus, right? Mm-hmm. So I mean, are those people like, I know lots of religions kind of believe that you need to love God and you need to know about God to be able to like go to heaven and move on. But I mean, if you never get that opportunity, like I don't know if you like not make it into heaven, or I'm just wondering about that.
Yeah, and so like, I'm sure that kind of concerns you, right? Like, is God ultimately just? Like, what if people never heard about God? Is he going to hold them to the same standard as he holds us as people who've been raised in the church? That doesn't seem fair, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question, and people have wondered about that. I mean, you can think of all the people who lived and died on this earth before Jesus came, right? That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
And there are people since Jesus' birth, death, and resurrection who never heard about him, right? From the farthest corners. Like, and we assume these days that people would, we're in a literate society with lots of information, World Wide Web. But I've had people tell me, when I tell them I work at a church, they're like, what's a church? Like, we live in a world too where certain things are actually forgotten, things that have been part of our culture. So what about people who haven't heard about Jesus? Can they be saved? Will they know God's care in heaven? I think ultimately I see God at work in all of our lives and God at work in all religions. I mean, there's good, like God is good, the source of goodness, and there's good in most religions, right? I think what we believe about Jesus and Christianity is this is kind of the full disclosure of God. I mean, God being born as a human, like that's about as good as it gets, right? That we can see God face to face. But is God active in other religions? I would tend to believe so. I mean, I've heard stories about people of other faiths who've dreamt about Jesus, like sort of seemingly out of nowhere. They have this dream about Jesus and they get really curious about him. I was reading some articles online this morning, and this commentator was saying that the first Aboriginal prophets the first Christian prophets, in North America were indigenous. And what this author is saying is that before the missionaries came to North America, there were Aboriginal prophets who were anticipating their arrival and their message. I mean, they talked about a prophet here named Beanie, and he knew the sign of the cross. He knew the 10 Commandments. He knew that the ghost people would be bringing an important message, which just sort of blows my mind. But it tells me that God is interested in letting people know about Jesus, people that in very human ways, but also in supernatural ways. But that maybe still doesn't answer the whole question, right? Because what about the people who haven't? I guess ultimately I'm left with the fact that I believe that God is just and merciful. And I trust that when I stand before God, that God will be merciful and just to me, not holding me responsible for things I had no control over, but being kind and gracious to me, and I guess I anticipate the same thing for others. I don't know if that helps you in terms of, what about those people? Does that sort of begin to answer that question?
Well, it does if you look at like when you were saying like God shows a lot of compassion. I think that kind of brings comfort, and I think you're right there. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, Brennan, I know you had about 3 more questions. Maybe we can talk about them some other times. But thank you for coming here. I was hoping when we started these spiritual biographies that more people would come with questions. So I'm grateful that you raised these questions. I mean, for people who've been raised in the church, who go to a Catholic school, Christian school, there's still lots to talk about, to explore, and to discover. So anyways, thanks for coming here.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me. It was awesome.
Awesome. Good. So can I see that? Can I see those shoes again? Like who designed these shoes? Do you know?
I don't know.
And they're called the what?
There's the Air Force Ones.
Why
Nike,
are they called Air Force Ones? It's like the pilots wear them?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's named after a plane or something. I'm not really sure.
Those are the presidential shoe sneaker.
Yeah, I'm sure that's it.
Yeah, these are not called anything. They're just called sandals.
Oh, it says something down here. It says a rock. Oh, okay,
Rockport,
okay. Yeah, that's very fancy.
Yeah, very fancy.
Top of the
I would
line.
wear yours, but I would get them dirty really quick. So they're better on you than me.